Hello, everybody. I hope that you're all good and ready to go with today's webclass. Okay, so have we got who's around at the moment ready for the webclass? We're going to be doing pathogens and viruses today. So some really interesting topics to do. And hopefully you're all there ready to join me. Do talk, do let me know how things are going and whether you can hear this. And then I'll start getting ready for the class. So I hope everybody's been having a good time and that work is not too arduous at the moment. It's been very stormy though around here. Right, let me sort out sharing. Let's get this up and running, shall we? Okay, there we go. Hopefully this will come up in just a second. Right, so hopefully this is clear and everybody can see the start of the web class. So today we're looking at pathogens and viral diseases. So let's get going, shall we? First of all, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Philippa and I am the lead GCSE biology teacher. I've got a BSc in animal science from Leeds University. I also stayed on at Leeds University and did my PGCE in biology and games. I've just finished as teacher and head of biology, and I've got 25 years of experience of teaching. I've got an infectious enthusiasm, I hope you'll find out. And I've been an exam marker. I have designed the syllabuses for various exam boards. And I've written for different companies, including Zigzag Education and CGP. So hopefully you'll find that I am quite experienced. Right, so let's move on. We need to look at our objectives for today's lesson. So today we're going to look at describing what pathogens are and how they can spread disease. We are going to explain how the spread of diseases can be reduced or prevented. And we're going to describe viruses and viral diseases in humans and plants. Viruses are a little bit tricky. Okay, so we will talk about those. But what I'm not going to cover today is virolytic and lysogenic pathways or examples of bacterial and fungal diseases. This will be covered in another class. All right. So obviously you don't all do the same exam classes. So let's have a look at this. AQA then. AQA, we're looking at the 4.3.1 communicable diseases, and we're looking at infectious diseases and viral diseases for AQA. For OCR then, we are looking at our 6.3s. So we're looking at the different types of diseases. We're looking at interactions between different types of diseases, communicable diseases, what those are, how they are spread, and giving some examples. Okay. With Edexcel, we describe a pathogen, what we talk about pathogens and what they are, and then we're going to describe some of the common infections. So we are going to look at the viral infections today. We also need to know about how pathogens are spread, and you also need to know about sexually transmitted infections. All right, so let's see what you already know then. What is the major structural difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells? So this is what we need to have a look at here. Have we got any ideas? So let's have a look. Right, so let's have a look at what we already know and what are prokaryotics. Okay, that's brilliant. Let's just move that across there. Okay, so major structural differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotic cells, we have cells which are eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, examples like bacteria. So eukaryotic cells, they have a true nucleus. All right, and prokaryotic cells, which basically means before, so prokaryotic, before a true nucleus. So they have cells that they have loose genetic material inside their cells. They don't have a nucleus. So no nucleus for the prokaryotic cells. They just have a chromosome in the center, whereas eukaryotic cells have all of their genetic material inside a membrane structure called a nucleus. So what is the difference between a communicable and a non-communicable disease, I wonder? What do we think for this? Okay, let's have a look. So non-communicable and communicable. So a non-communicable disease cannot be spread between organisms, all right? So non-communicable, can't be communicated, all right? And then communicable can be spread. So let's get that down. Non-communicable cannot be spread between organisms. But a communicable disease can. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you all. Right. Okay. So let's move on to the next part then. So we'll actually start looking at pathogens today. So here we go. Here's part one, is pathogens. So we need to know what pathogens are, all right? So basically pathogens can cause disease, infectious disease, and they are basically microorganisms and viruses, all right? So microorganisms. Now microorganisms are small organisms that can only be seen under the microscope. They're not visible to the eye, to the naked eye. And most microorganisms are actually harmless. We use them for everyday sorts of things like making yogurt, making cheese. We can make antibiotics from them, all sorts of things. And most we eat some fungi. So most of them are harmless, but some of them can cause infectious disease. So microorganisms and viruses that cause infectious diseases. Now I've put microorganisms and viruses because microorganisms tend to be regarded as living and viruses tend to be regarded as non-living. They just they're like protein coats with some sort of genetic material inside them, and often not regarded as living because they don't have the 8 characteristics of life. So what we talk about is the microorganisms. We've got bacteria, we've got fungi, and what you may call protists or productists, depending on your board. They can be called either. So protists or productists, it doesn't matter which you use there, and viruses. And there we've got viruses with the protein coat and the genetic material inside, all right? And here you can see that bacteria are eukaryotes because they don't have a nucleus. They've just got a loose piece of DNA. There's just got a loose chromosome. Okay, there's their chromosome just loose inside the cell. So they don't actually have a nucleus. And so they are prokaryotes. All the others are eukaryotes. All right. So moving on then, let's have a look at the pathogen life cycle then, shall we? So what is a pathogen life cycle, do we think? So it's a simple life cycle, how it goes from infecting somebody, multiplying inside that person, and then being spread onto other people, all right? So it's something that we've all talked about quite a lot because obviously with COVID all over the world, we've talked about pathogen life cycles and how we can try to stop that spread of them, don't we? So it's a very simple life cycle. Basically, they infect a host to start off with. So they get into the host. So here we've got a human as a host, but some of these pathogens can infect all sorts of different animals and plants. It doesn't have to be humans. We can look at trees or dogs or cows or anything basically that is living can be infected by a pathogen. We even have things called bacteriophages, which are viruses which infect bacteria. All right, so they infect a host to start off with, and they're going to reproduce inside the host. Now, bacteria will just reproduce inside. Viruses have to go inside our cells to reproduce. So they reproduce inside the host. And they can produce toxins, for example, which may damage our cells. Or they might, like viruses, invade the cells, multiply, and then burst out of the cells. So they're going to damage our cells, which is what makes us poorly. And they're making toxins. Many of them make us feel poorly because they're making toxins, poisons that affect our body. So there's an incubation period, which is a time delay between the entry of that microorganism pathogen and then to the feeling unwell. So the incubation period is from the infection to when you're actually feeling unwell. And as they reproduce inside, they cause cell damage, and some, like I said, produce toxic waste, so poisons, causing symptoms like fevers and rashes. All right. So we'll learn a little bit more about this when we have a look at specific pathogens and diseases. So many pathogens can survive without their host for a period of time. Okay, so for example, a Staphylococcus bacterium can survive outside a host organism. Other organisms can't survive once they are outside. And one of them we're going to talk about is HIV. All right, so they spread from the host. So they might sneeze, or just breathing into the air, as we know, which is why a lot of us are wearing masks, all right, because that is preventing that spread of pathogens. So they're spread from their host, and then they infect others. And then, of course, the whole life cycle starts again, and they'll infect the new host, they'll start to multiply, they'll damage cells, they'll release toxins, and then they'll be spread onto somebody else. And so we can spread it very easily by having contact with other people, breathing over people, coughing and sneezing over other people. All of that will pass on this pathogen and allow it to spread and carry on making more of itself. All right. So that's why we have to try to stop that life cycle if we want to stop the spread of this pathogen. So how can organisms be spread? That's the next thing that we need to look at. And it's very important to understand about the spread of pathogens so that we can try to reduce that spread. So spread of pathogens. So this first one, we got droplets in the air, haven't we? When somebody has sneezed and not put a tissue over their nose. So droplets, okay, in the air. So this is airborne. So then we've got this. So here we can see we've got pathogens inside this water. So water and drinks, especially in areas where the water is not purified, what can happen is we can end up with these pathogens in the water because the water hasn't been purified. All right. So water and drinks. Then obviously physical contact is one of them, which is why we all had to do the 2-meter distance and all the rest of that during the peak of COVID because of physical contact. And things like cuts are really bad for passing on, because if you cut yourself and pass on your blood, or you receive blood from somebody else, that can carry pathogens as well. Then here we've got an apple with a pathogen in it. All right, so food, so it could be maybe some worms in some meat, or it could be that a fungus has started to grow on some moldy fruit. All right, all of those can pass it on. And then other animals that are vectors. So a classic one is malaria with that here. So the other animals that pass it from one organism to another are known as vectors. So when we're looking at malaria, the mosquito here is a vector, because what it's doing is it is biting somebody, sucking up their blood, which might have the malaria plasmodium in it, and then they'll go and bite somebody else. And what they do is they spit into the wound that they've bitten into to stop the blood from clotting so they can suck up the blood. And it's only the females that do it because they need the protein for their eggs. And so they're sucking up blood to make eggs. And at the same time, they're spitting this anticoagulant down their mouth parts into you, and that could carry the malaria plasmodium. And so then it's infecting new people. So here we have airborne respiratory system. So common cold is a classic one, but COVID, as we all know, is airborne. And you've got these tiny droplets of water when an infected person sneezes or coughs. We've got water. An example of that one is cholera, actually. So we could have e.g. cold, flu, COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus. Then we could have cholera here. Giardia is another one that you may have come across. Insect bites or cuts or injury in the skins. Or sexual intercourse, e.g. chlamydia, which many people will have heard of because it's a very common STI. And then we've got food, so we can have food poisoning like salmonella, causing nasty food poisoning. Some people may have had that. Food poisoning is not very nice. And then as I talked to you about malaria. Okay. So those are all examples of diseases that can be caused by pathogens, and there's all these different ways of spreading the pathogens around. Okay, so let's move on and see how, now that we know how these pathogens can be spread, how about how we can reduce the spread of the disease? Okay. So let's have a look at this. Reducing the spread of disease. And I just want to try and see the chat here. Right. So reducing the spread of disease then. Let me just have a look at this. Okay. Droplets, yeah, brilliant. How long is this lesson? The lesson's an hour. All right. So sorry, I lost the comments for a moment, but I've got them back again. Brilliant. All right. So now we've got to think about reducing the spread of the disease. Now, a lot of you are good at, you should know now some examples of spreading of disease, can't you? So who can tell me some spreading of diseases? What sort of things spread the diseases? Let's have a look. Better medication, being hygienic. Excellent. Yes, being hygienic. That's good. All right. So washing your hands is a good way of being hygienic, isn't it? So wash your hands. Excellent. That's a good one. Access to better medication. Yes. What about, let's have a think about the airborne one. What about the airborne one? Can we think of anything for the airborne? So things like what we have to do at the moment, we've had to really be careful, haven't we, with COVID, but you also have to worry about it when it's flu season, except dirty water is a vector of disease. Absolutely. So we need to drink clean water, don't we? Drink clean water. Excellent. Isolating the infected people. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Isolating. Yes. Covering. And when you're out, if you want to sneeze, covering your mouth and nose when you cough and sneeze. What about the food one? Face masks, absolutely. And everybody has to wear them, not just one person. It's ideal is to have both people using face masks. All right, so everybody needs to use them for it to be effective. Absolutely. Food then, if it was some contamination food like salmonella, for example, if you don't cook chicken properly and it's still cold in the middle, you've got to cook it properly and get it to the right temperature. Don't know whether you've ever seen the food thermometers that you can use that you can stick into the food. So I use them all the time when I'm doing cooked chicken and cooked turkey. You can check the temperature inside the meat to make sure it's got up to a high enough temperature to destroy any pathogens in there. Good. So cooking food properly. Well done. That's really good. Some of you are on fire here. Vaccination, yes. Good. Vaccination is a good one. So reducing the spread of disease, will fit that one in as well, because vaccination is obviously important. That's being driven home a lot at the moment. With STIs, sexually transmitted infections, you should use protection. Okay, so using protection is important. Somebody talked about isolation, so don't touch infected people or objects. So we talk about isolation, don't we, if somebody's infected? So that's keeping them out of the population. Drugs, things can be, yes, gloves, using gloves. That's a really important thing, isn't it? Because if you are constantly touching food, it's either wash your hands really carefully with a really good anti-pathogen gel, or you need to be wearing gloves. So that's really good. So excellent. Yes. Now drugs is a bit, can be a nasty one. When people are using needles for drugs, they can share needles, and then that means that some of their blood is getting passed on to the next person who's using needles. So as they inject themselves, some blood gets into the needle, they then pass it on, and that's blood being passed on. So do not share needles. That's a really important one. And they've got some really important schemes going on in areas where drugs is a real problem, where people can turn up and hand in old needles and take new needles, and they don't have to give their name or anything. They can just go and get clean needles. All right. So, and protect yourself from animal bites. So for malaria, for example, they use mosquito nets. once strains of bacteria becomes resistant you mean if they become resistant to antibiotics, they're constantly discovering new antibiotics. And the other thing is, so antibiotics against a lot of bacterial diseases, actually using masks does help with this, because a lot of bacterial diseases are passed on in the air. All right. So yes, there is a problem with resistance. That's a really good point. Bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics, but they are constantly discovering new antibiotics. So let's hope, the ones that have caused, the superbugs, as you may have heard of them, MRSA in the hospitals, they are trying to develop new antibiotics, but you do have to be really careful. It's all about washing hands, using masks, not touching things, all right? That is the way that you have to reduce the spread. And reducing the use of antibiotics means that less of them will become resistant. And if you do be put on a course of antibiotics, you've got to make sure that you use the whole course. Because if you don't use the whole course, what happens is you use the course until you start to feel well. So you've reduced the number of bacteria, so they're not making you poorly. But as soon as you stop taking the antibiotics again, they'll increase in number. And then that's all the really strong bacteria who've managed to resist the antibiotics so far. And so you are helping develop bacteria which are resistant to antibiotics. So if you are put on antibiotics, you must make sure you take the whole course. It's really important. All right. And you may have recalled doing some experiments at school where you use aseptic techniques such as heating loops in flames before you pick up bacteria, etc., making sure that Petri dishes are sterile and that they're sealed so the bacteria can't get out. All of those things are really important to stop spread of disease. Yeah. Was bitten by a tick and she caught melanoma. Yes, ticks are nasty. They can cause a lot of problems. So yeah, you've got to try to protect it. If you are going to walk through long grass where there's a likelihood of ticks, and that's in areas where there's lots of deer or sheep, etc., you must wear long trousers, make sure you wear socks, make sure you wear strong shoes, because the ticks can't latch on if you've got clothes over those areas. It's if you walk through these sort of long grasses where deer and sheep have been, and you've got shorts on, you are more likely to get ticks. You might, if you have dogs, you might check for ticks if you've been in areas where there's long grass. So yeah, ticks are a real problem. They can spread disease. Okay. An impact on the environment, not with the antibiotics. Obviously, we don't want to disrupt food chains too much, but pathogens are, we do need to keep those under control. All right. There's some really good points out there. All right. Some really, really good ones. Now, I'm hoping all of these have come up. Have you? I hope you can all see what I have written there. So, and it's all still connected. Right, can you all see the reducing of speed? So what I want to look at now is how confident you all are. All right, so let's see how confident you are. So now we should be looking at how confident you are feeling. Straightforward, all right, super confused. Hopefully you can all see this. Okay. So can you all see the screen now, which is asking you how confident you are feeling? Hopefully that's all okay. And then, right. So how confident are we feeling on all of this? Are we all okay? Straightforward, all right, super confused. So let's, yeah. You can't see it. I don't understand why that isn't going forward. Let me try that again. Right. I can't see it. Okay. I'm just trying to reconnect at the moment to see whether it will link. I'm hoping that you'll see this in a minute, because otherwise I don't understand what is happening. Okay. Has it moved on yet? No? Live stream. Right, okay, I am trying to find out why this is not working. Okay, give me just 1 second and let's see whether we can get this up and running again properly. But you can still hear me, you just can't see the change. Right, I'm hoping that you can see the change. Yes, that's come up now, hasn't it? Yeah? Yes, now faces. Thank goodness for that. I don't know what happened. It seemed to just freeze on me then. Right, never mind. We're back on track. So let's have, yeah, brilliant. I'm so pleased. Right, let's have a look at an exam question then, shall we? So the immune system aims to destroy pathogens such as bacteria and viruses. Yes, you can see it. Yeah, brilliant. I'm so pleased. Right. The immune system aims to destroy pathogens such as bacteria and viruses if they manage to infect the body. Pathogens make us feel unwell. Give one reason. We had 2 reasons, if you remember. Give me one reason why pathogens make us feel unwell. Can anybody tell me that? Yeah? Can you remember why the pathogens make you feel ill? If you remember, I said that the pathogens enter the body, don't they? They multiply, and as they're multiplying, they're doing something. And that's what makes us feel poorly. Brilliant. Well done, Anna. Yeah. So they pathogens may secrete toxins. Well done. And they can also cause cell damage. So either of those would be fine. All right. So they can either, if you remember, viruses can only multiply by entering your cells, multiplying inside your cells, taking over your cells, and then bursting out. Yes. So they damage our cells. Well done. Yeah, that is really good answers. Well done. Okay. But it's not moving on again, is it? I can see I had the question up, but it hasn't moved on. You joined late. Okay, right. Why has that not moved on? I don't know. It seems to be being a bit of a pest at the moment. Has it moved on yet? Nope. Okay. Right. That looks like it's joined again. Yeah. I have no idea why this is doing this, but hopefully we can keep going. Right, so pathogens make us feel unwell. Give us one reason why. So pathogens secrete toxins and they can cause cell damage. All right, so you can all see that now. Good. Yeah, it's working now. I have no idea what is happening at the moment. So I'm hoping that it's not going to keep doing this all the way through. So I'm going to move it on now, and hopefully you'll be able to see in a second. Yeah, you can see the new screen now, can't you? Fantastic. Right. So what we're looking at now is read this article about a disease that occurs in South America. Doctors are concerned about the spread of disease. Now, you may have all heard about Zika virus. So Zika is a disease that is caused by a virus. Yeah, it's a really nasty disease. It is spread by mosquitoes again. So the mosquitoes are vectors. Yeah. In most people, the disease is quite mild. However, there is evidence that in pregnant women, it can slow the growth of the baby's brain. The disease cannot be treated by antibiotics. Scientists are trying to develop a vaccine for the Zika virus. Now, obviously, why can't it be treated by antibiotics if it's passed on by a virus? Can anybody tell me why they think that we can't use antibiotics against the Zika virus? Right, so it's passed on by a vector. Brilliant, you've got the right answer there, vector. And it can't be treated by antibiotics because only bacterial diseases can be treated by antibiotics. So antibiotics are only for bacteria, all right? And what is the name given to the role of the mosquito? Well, it's an animal passing a disease on from one animal to another. So it is a vector. A vector passes on disease. Excellent. So now that we've done that, we're going to actually look at the viral diseases. So I'm hoping this, yeah, brilliant. It is moving on. So let's have a look at this then. Hopefully it will take us to our new picture. So what we have here is we're looking at viral diseases and how viruses infect our cells and make us poorly. So viruses, like I said, are not regarded as alive because they don't have the 8 characteristics of life. They don't respire, for example. So we have strains rather than species, and they replicate, they do not reproduce, okay? So they can't reproduce by themselves. What they have to do is they replicate themselves by infecting a host cell and taking over that host cell and making that host cell make new viruses. All right, so viruses are simple, small, very small, non-living pathogens. So they're non-living because they don't carry out all the 8 characteristics of life. So what we have is we have genetic material in the middle. This is the genetic material. The yellow bit in the middle is the genetic material. And this can be DNA or RNA. Okay, and then it has a protein coat around the outside. This is the protein coat. You might have heard of spike proteins as well, which act as antigens. All right, so antigens are found around the outside. Now, can anybody tell me what an antigen is? Maybe remember, or have you come across antigens before? Antigens. How can it affect a host? They move around randomly, and then when one protein can attach to another protein, like the proteins on the outside of our cells, they just join together, they're attracted to each other. All right. But they're not, so they don't carry out the 8 characteristics of life, so they're regarded as non-living. There's other things like prions, which also cause disease, which are proteins, all right? So antigens, when we talk about antigens, these are things that trigger an immune response, all right? So antigens trigger an immune response. What they are is they're normally proteins and they're foreign proteins. So they're recognized as non-self by our body, and that will cause our immune system to start to attack them. So let's have a look at this particular virus. What's happened is maybe it's airborne and you've breathed it in, so it's infected the host. Infect the host here, and what they do is they inject, as the protein binds to the proteins on the outside of a cell, it basically pushes the genetic material into the host cell. Enters host cell, all right? And then what it does is it basically takes over the nucleus of this host cell. So this is your host cell here. and it takes over the genetic makeup of the cell, and it makes the cell copy the viral genetic material. And because it makes it copy this viral genetic material, what it does, that viral genetic material then develops into new viruses. And then what happens is the viruses, they fill the cell and they burst out when they're ready. And this is known as lysis, because lysis is to split. So it splits open the host cell and the new viruses are released, and that cell is now killed. All right, so the host cell is destroyed by this. So, but that's why a lot of viruses make you feel so ill. So they infect a single cell, it's a host cell, they then take over that cell, their genetic material is copied, all right, then from that genetic material, the information is given to make the new proteins around and the antigens around the genetic material, and then they burst open, ready to infect more cells. So it can be very nasty, make you feel very poorly. So let's have a look at a few of these diseases that we can get. So you may have heard of HIV. HIV is human immunodeficiency virus, all right? Human immunodeficiency virus. So I'll write that down for you because it's quite a big word. Human immunodeficiency virus. And it leads to AIDS, which is acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which you should have heard of. So HIV is spread via body fluids, e.g. by sexual intercourse, sharing needles, you might have heard stick injury, needle stick injury, that they worry about if you're a paramedic or something like that, being caught by a needle, or when you're a doctor or something, you've got to be really careful with the sharp bins to put the needles into the bin, because otherwise you can end up catching, getting the virus into your body. And during birth, so mothers can, if they are HIV positive, they can pass the virus on to their child. So what happens? Stage 1, you can get flu-like symptoms. So you start to feel achy, feel tired, and really don't want to get out of bed. Then stage 2, what happens? It actually goes into a dormant stage, all right? So there's no symptoms. And during this stage, you might have just thought, oh, I've just had a bit of flu, get over it, I'm fine now. But actually what's happening during that stage are the viruses are starting to get into your cells and starting to multiply, all right? Good, I'm really pleased. I hope that was useful, because it can be quite tricky understanding about this replication of viruses. All right, so we've got this HIV, it's got into the body by body fluids such as sexual intercourse, by sharing needles if you're taking drugs. During birth, it passes from the mother to the baby, and also it can be passed on in breast milk as well. And like I said, you might not know you're infected during the dormant stage, and that's really dangerous, because you've got to have open sores, and it would have to carry a lot of saliva, because it tends not to pass into saliva as much. It's much more in blood. All right. So if it's blood to blood, that's the problem. All right. So it's mainly the blood that carries it in. Very, very low levels in saliva. So and unless you're sort of bleeding, then it's so. If you are both bleeding in your mouth and kiss, then it is possible, right? That's the idea. So you've just got to be really, really careful with this. So in stage 3, we have a late stage HIV, which is known as, we're now talking about AIDS, because what it's doing is it's now starting to affect our immune system. It attacks our T helper cells, all right? So it's acquired, AIDS stands for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And this is the actual illness which is caused by the HIV virus infecting you. And what it does is it takes over these special cells called helper T cells, or T cells, which help the whole immune system to respond. So if they're getting destroyed, then the immune system can't respond, because the cells that control the immune system are getting wiped out by this virus. So it's really quite bad. All right, so the virus targets the immune cells. So the body cannot fight off cancers, for example, and other infections, e.g. tuberculosis. Pneumonia is a classic one, which causes major problems. And basically, you're getting all of these infections and you can't fight them off, and just basically you get too ill. Yeah, absolutely, you can. But what happens is the common cold quite often develops into pneumonia, and that's what really causes the problem. All right. So yes, it is a real problem. People who are HIV positive, and if they stop taking their medication, there's absolutely brilliant medication out there now, which really suppresses it down to minimum numbers, so you wouldn't even know that you're ill. But if you don't take those drugs, or if those drugs stop working, then the numbers increase, and that's when you are very vulnerable to lots of different diseases. So yes, you have to be very careful, and they need to make sure that they take their medication. All right. So that's a really serious one, HIV. Okay, but this one you might have heard of, which is very common, and you may have heard of, we managed to get rid of measles. So measles is an airborne disease. Most of you will have heard of measles, I would have thought. So measles is airborne, which means it can be spread via tiny droplets. Measles, mumps, and rubella is one of the vaccinations you can have when you're young. So tiny droplets in coughs and sneezes. And what happens is it can cause this fever and a red skin rash. It's highly infectious. It was, but unfortunately, we're starting to see small pockets of measles occurring again, because less people are having the MMR vaccination, because there was some paper a long time ago where somebody used data to connect it to autism, and so people stopped having the vaccinations against it. But actually, this can be really problematic, because as soon as we stop that, we need this high vaccination number, because if we don't, what happens is little pockets can start to arrive, because it hasn't been eradicated from the whole world. And it's highly infectious. It's a common viral disease, and it's usually transmitted between young people. But the big problem is with pregnant women. It can cause major problems with pregnant women. Okay. So it is a real problem, they can end up with children being born, stillbirth, etc. All right. It can also lead to sterility, in other words, people being sterile, and what we call congenital disabilities. In children, in unborn children. So if a pregnant woman catches measles, it can cause congenital disabilities. All right, so it can be quite serious. For most people, if you're a normal, healthy person, it won't have major effects on you. But if you're a pregnant woman, it can have a real problem. All right. So now we need to look, because it's not just humans that are getting viral diseases. Other animals do. Yeah, exactly. It does exist in some parts of the world, which is why we managed to eradicate it from the UK for some time, but pockets have started to pop up again because people are bringing it in from other parts of the world, and because we haven't got that brilliant vaccination rate, because people are scared of having the MMR vaccination, this is why we're getting little pockets peep up again. All right. So let's have a look at TMV in plants, tobacco mosaic virus. So TMV, the tobacco mosaic virus. This is a very common viral disease in plants, in tobacco plants, funny enough. And what it does, if you can see over here, can you see what's happened to this leaf? This is a nice healthy leaf, and then it becomes like this. All right, so what it does is it forms yellow white leaf. So basically it gets rid of the chlorophyll, discoloration, and it looks a bit like a mosaic, which is why it's called the tobacco mosaic virus. Ah, yes, yeah, that's true. That's another viral disease, yes, with the roses. Okay, and you get reduced growth because what's happened is the chlorophyll has been broken down. So reduced growth due to lack of photosynthesis because the chlorophyll has been broken down. And the plants that are affected are tobacco, funny enough, but also, believe it or not, tomatoes and potatoes can also be affected by the tobacco mosaic virus. It was called the TMV, tobacco mosaic virus, because it was discovered first in tobacco plants. And what happens is it's mainly spread by contact with other infected leaves. So if you're growing a whole lot of tobacco in a field, all right, if one plant gets infected, it can quite easily spread through the whole of the field because the leaves, if they're quite closely growing, then the leaves will touch and they just pass it on that way. So this one is through contact with infected leaves or contaminated tools when farmers are working. Contaminated hands, or if you go and grow some more tobacco in a field where TMV has been there. So also infected soil can cause a problem. All right. Basically, it destroys the chloroplasts. There's no cure for it. Estimated losses to tobacco mosaic virus is approximately $60 billion each year, apparently. But you can genetically modify the tobacco plants to become resistant to TMV, all right? So how happy are we feeling about these viral diseases then? 1, 2, or 3? What do we reckon? Are we going to be all right to go on to the last exam question then? So we've got the last exam question. Hopefully you're all feeling nice and confident about these viral diseases. Hopefully you are finding them really interesting. I find them really interesting, I have to say. I love doing about immunity. It's fascinating. So what we're going to do then is we're going to finish off with a question. Yeah, good, well done. Pleased that you're enjoying it and that you're confident with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish off with a question on HIV, all right? So, good, well done, Anna, good. So HIV is a viral disease that can significantly reduce a person's life expectancy if antiretroviral treatment is not started in good time. Those are those medications to reduce the number of viruses, stopping them from being able to multiply or replicate. In late stage HIV infection, the body becomes prone to other infections. Explain why. So can anybody tell me why our bodies become prone to other diseases such as colds, flu, then development onto pneumonia, cancers, etc.? Okay, so 2 is not too bad. Hopefully you can go back over this lesson as well at a later time. Brilliant. It weakens the immune system because what cells is it going to attack? Yeah, okay, the immune cells, which are white blood cells. So it weakens the immune system so it can't fight. Oh, yes, because you didn't see it all, did you? But hopefully you understand what we've gone through. Brilliant, the T cells, well done for remembering that. The helper T cells. So HIV targets and destroys white blood cells. And if you want to remember which ones they are, it's the helper T cells because they're helping the rest of the immune system to respond. So that's 1 mark. Therefore, this which weakens the immune system. So that's another mark. Yeah, white blood cells are affected. T cells, which are a type of white blood cell, are affected. Well done. And so the body is less able to fight off other infections. And that gives us our 3 marks, doesn't it? All right. So it's that HIV, the virus, getting into the white blood cells, the helper T cells, they multiply, they burst out, they destroy those T helper cells. So therefore, that they can't trigger the immune system to respond to the HIV. And so therefore, we get this, the whole immune system starts to shut down and we can't fight off all of those infections. So for example, tuberculosis, bacterium can infect you. All right, well done. So today then, what we should have been able to do is we should now be able to describe what pathogens are. So they're those microorganisms, which are bacteria, fungi, protists. You don't need to know. It's just that I mentioned helper T cells are immune cells, white blood cells. They're special types of white blood cells which help trigger the rest of the white blood cells to respond. That's why they're called helper T cells, because they are helping the rest of the immune system to respond. All right. So describe what pathogens are. So pathogens are microorganisms such as bacteria, fungi, and protists, as well as viruses, and they can spread disease. And we know that disease can be spread by water, food, touch, infected needles, air droplets. So all of those, bites, stings, etc. Yeah, no problem. All of those help reduce. If we know how they're transmitted, we can therefore reduce the transmission by wearing masks, making sure we sterilize water, that we cook food properly, that we try not to get bitten by insects by using mosquito nets, that sort of thing. Making sure you wear long trousers through long grass so that you don't get ticks. All right. And then we had a look at viruses in particular, about how they infect our cells by injecting their DNA or RNA into our cells, which then takes over the cells. The new genetic material is multiplied, and then the protein coats are made. Then we've got new viruses inside that cell, and they burst out by lysis, destroying the cells. All right. So, and we then talked about HIV, measles, and tobacco mosaic virus. So do you have any last minute questions? And it literally is last minute. And then just remember there are some more Snap Revise classes coming up. So we've got maths and physics coming up. All right. So on the 19th of December and the 12th of December, 12th of December for maths, 19th of December for our physics. All right, I hope you all enjoyed today's lesson, that you found it okay. And there's It cleared up some problems with pathogens, and I hope you have a really good week. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.